is there anything else technology can do to help in this regard? I mean, people have often talked about blockchain in the music industry with its complexity around the rights positions. Are there any other high-tech solutions to some of these questions?
So many. You mentioned blockchain. I think something we maybe should also mention is NFTs,
yes,
which are all the craze today. They might not be all the craze tomorrow, let's see, a bit like SPACs, I guess. Could be a fad, could be a trend. But I think what's interesting with NFTs, if I go back to that very simple 2x2 matrix, scarce, not scarce, excludable, not excludable, is it's a desperate attempt to recreate scarcity in the market, a desperate attempt to introduce scarcity to a business model. There is kind of an interesting backstory to NFTs, which goes way before my time, 1975. And the rock band Kiss.
Oh, yeah.
You remember Kiss?
I do indeed.
You ever had the makeup on?
I've never gone to that extent.
Okay.
But yeah.
The band Kiss, who had this thing called Kiss Army, they had the biggest fan club in the world. And they would sell everything from Kiss models, Kiss wallpaper, Kiss toilet paper.
Really?
Yep.
Amazing.
They pioneered Kiss toilet paper. You could literally use toilet paper with Gene Simmons' tongue sticking out. By the way, Gene Simmons, he tried to trademark the dollar bill because nobody had a trademark on the day. He wanted to spell Kiss with $2 symbols. But what they did is they had a competition there to say, if you enter this competition, which obviously costs money, 5 winners will get a lucky photograph of the band with the makeup off. Now you might be thinking we're talking NFTs, where are you going, Will? Follow. So 5 lucky people out of thousands of people entered this competition and got this amazing photograph of the rock band Kiss with the makeup off. And when you opened the envelope and pulled this lucky photograph off, after it was exposed to natural light, the picture disappeared after 5 seconds. Genius, genius, genius. In 1975, Gene Simmons invented the first NFT. And a lot of what we're discussing now is exactly that. So when we discuss what other forms of digital innovation could help here, there's a big point to be made, which is whatever we're discussing, we've been here before. You'll find in the book especially, you'll find examples of where people have been here before. When we discuss crowdfunding technology, Patreon, Kickstarter, huge developments happening there. I mean, Patreon's got $2 billion out to creators in 7 years? 7 years? $2 billion? But it's important to remember, we've been here before. Charles Dickens adopted a very similar model. He didn't sell books. He sold chapters by the installment. He got to the many, not the few that way. So what I really hope the book does is, A, open your eyes to these innovations, but B, remind ourselves that we've been here before.
And you've touched on the importance of curation and, I guess, data, understanding consumer preferences through data. What are the key things some media companies need to do to really get to grips with that, do you think?
I think that in the early stages of the book, I just try to hammer this point home about what it means for the music industry to not just let go of the old vine of ownership, but of understanding transactions, and grab onto the new vine of consumption analytics. And this might sound a little bit confusing, like what's the difference? It's huge. In the late 90s, when the business was, in its cocaine capitalism heyday, where the book Kill Your Friends, which I recommend your viewers read at pace.
I have read it. John Niven.
That great line where somebody asks an A&R talent scout what music they like. It's like, what a stupid question to ask a talent scout. It's like asking an investment banker, what's your favourite currency? Robson and Jerome sold 5 million CDs to the British population. They couldn't sing, they couldn't perform, they couldn't write, and they sold 5 million CDs. Taylor Swift can't do that today. So, what happened back then was we used to sell CDs by the weight of pallet. I'd have a pallet of CDs in front of us. Hey, I've got a pallet of CDs, how much do you give it for me? Your first question was not what's on it, but how much does that pallet of CDs weigh? Well, 35 kilos. Great, I'll give you this much. Great, you've got a young person's rail card, you can have a 30% discount. That was how our business worked. And that business that we ridicule was worth more back then than it is today before you adjust for inflation. So be careful what we're laughing at here.
Yeah.
Now we've got consumption analytics. So we don't look at how many CDs were sold. Did Simon open that CD? Did he play it once? Did he play it more than once? Did he play all the songs more than once? Nobody knew. Just like newspapers. Think about that. We don't know how many we sold until we count the copies that came back. Now what we do is we measure consumption. So we understand how you're consuming music, not how you're buying music. And I think that jump is going to be universal. You mentioned Rishi Sunak. Let's say we presented him with car sales data, a classic economic metric that, journalists will talk about because it's a metric and that's what they do. They don't think about what the metric's telling them. But let's say car sales data is up 2% this time last year. Great, headline story, page 1, car sales are up 2%. That's a transaction. We have sold 2% more cars than this time last year. How about the consumption? Who bought those cars and how are they using those cars? Are they using them less often? What would that mean for the environment if we had that data? Are they using them for business purposes? Were the old Toyotas being acquired by Uber drivers? That would be relevant data. So that shift from letting go of how things were sold to understanding how things are consumed, I think you can look just about everywhere in life and see how everyone is going to start dealing with that transition.
And what about using data for commissioning purposes? So we know Netflix do that. Some of the major music labels are sort of getting into that. What are the implications of that, do you think? All the great Svengalis of history, Alan McGee or Berry Gordy or whoever, do we not need them anymore?
You called Alan McGee a great Svengali? I call him an incoherent Glaswegian drunk, but when I met him. So with that, I think it's a great honour to work in an Economist article recently called "And the Winner is ... Who cares?" ? And credit to Tom Wainwright, who wrote the piece. I was working on various different parts of it, helping him out. But the thrust of that article was, those great Svengalis and Alan McGee that you mentioned earlier. Who cares about the judges now, when it's the algorithm that gets us to our music of choice? What is the role for these judges when we're driven by algorithms? My Discover Weekly, my 30 songs every Monday, is my music, and it's got nothing to do with your music. We have nothing to discuss over the water cooler in the middle, in between us. That one-to-many broadcast model has essentially broken down, and we have many one-to-one intimate relationships. And, it does question whether you need those judges anymore. Now, on one hand, you could say they're all useless and surplus to requirements. On the other hand, maybe the pendulum's going to swing back. Maybe the algorithm drives us into an echo chamber situation. I think you can see this happening on social media. And you actually need human curators to say, to separate the wheat from the chaff, the filler from the killer. And you have that human interaction role. Maybe there's going to be a role for bringing that back into the place. But for now, it's just interesting to see that we have these huge award shows and nothing changes afterwards. Yeah. So the purpose of this huge award show was what? I won a Grammy. And did sales go up? Did streams go up? Doesn't really matter. I just won a Grammy. Keynes, the great economist Keynes, had a great remark about this where he talks about the Keynesian beauty contest. Very simple. If you're looking at a beauty pageant and I ask Simon, which of those beautiful models is going to win the competition? Do you think I believe model number 2 is most beautiful? Or do you think I think the judges will think that model number 3 is most beautiful? I think we're leaving behind that world where we thought like the judges, and we're entering a new world where we think by ourselves. Consumers become broadcasters, essentially.
So the Oscars going to be obsolete then?
Well, what was the other one? The Golden Globe, I think, lost their sponsorship at the last minute.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the first time we're going to be reading stories like that.
Okay. So what do you think are the three, other than things you've already mentioned, what are the 3 big themes for the media industry to think about?
3. Attention, and attention. I'll block the whole thing on attention just to get your attention, or to make you pay attention. And the chapter in the book is called Paying Attention, which by its own wording has got a twist to it, which is that if you look at how we speak in English, school teachers will say to kids, pay attention, kids. You might say to a bunch of hungover junior accountants, pay attention, this P&L has been done wrongly. So we say pay, which has got a currency tone to it. Other languages don't. If you look at Swedish, French, Spanish as examples, it's offer, share, or give. You're not going to get a kid's attention by saying, could you offer me your attention, please? No, not in my primary school that I went to. That wouldn't work. But yeah, I look at that and I just think that attention is the first fork in the road you got to master before you do anything else, before you raise capital, before you devise your 3-year strategy, before you forge a mission statement, or any of that stuff, that fluffy stuff. You've got to crack where you sit with attention. And The simple example is attention can be binary, either you have it or you don't, or it could be stackable. You could have many competing forms chasing for your attention at once. But we know attention is scarce. And if I go back to Netflix as an example, if I go back to Narcos as a product, or maybe even better if I mention Breaking Bad. I say this because I'm in a bit of a stushy right now, as we say in Scotland. I'm going to meet Vince Gilligan next week. When I was told that he loved the book, I was like, who's Vince Gilligan? To which this very famous producer said to me, did you just say that? Have you not seen Breaking Bad? I said, nope. So I am currently on season 4, episode 2 of Breaking Bad, and I got to finish it the whole 6 seasons before I go in front of Vince. And I'm watching 2 episodes of Breaking Bad a night. That's 2 hours that Netflix gets. And it's substitutional. It's contestability. Netflix wins 2 hours, which means everyone else loses, which means everyone else has got increasingly less time to compete for. Music lost those 2 hours. Social media lost those 2 hours. Gaming lost those 2 hours. My relations lost those 2 hours. Netflix won. Their gain is everybody else's pain. We lost. So I just want to introduce that concept of contestability of attention for media companies to say, have you really thought through the attention economics of what you're trying to do, the product you're trying to sell, the service you're trying to promote, the technology you're trying to scale? And if you haven't, please try and think about a framework for understanding how this contestability of attention is going to play out so you know where you position in it. So the framework that I offer in the book is kind of a bizarre story. You don't go to Ofcom for anything inspirational, agreed? But in 2010, they published a report which nobody read, disappeared into the mountain of PDF files. I don't know how many trees that regulator's destroyed. But they had a framework for attention, which I found so illuminating. I will swear down to you that I've not had a meeting inside Spotify or with Spotify partners where I haven't referred to it. And all they do is they say, break attention into 5 buckets, if I can get this correct: watch, listen, gaming, reading, and communicating. Okay, makes sense? Mm-hmm. 5 ways to spend your attention. Yep. Then they look at a 2-axis chart which says, what was the relative importance of these activities? And then on the vertical axis, what was the relative attention given to these activities? And then in the chart, they have these circles based on size of participation in those activities. This was 2010. Streaming music was really small, but it was also in the southwest corner of this chart. Nobody was paying attention to it, and it wasn't considered that important. David Bowie, who we lost 5.5 years ago, 20 years ago, said music will just become like running water, always on, always available. And music's got A, more valuable, to the envy of every other media industry, but B, less important. Less attention is given to it. Can you tell me who's number 1 this week? If anybody in PricewaterhouseCoopers can tell me, I will offer them a bottle of Speyside Sherry Cask whiskey, and I swear down I will honour that privilege. Nobody cares. It's just Discover Weekly. It's just music. It's wallpaper. So then you look at Netflix, and they're moving up to the northeast quadrant because you really lean in with attention then, and you screen distractions out. So with that framework, I think the lesson there is there's a value to winning attention and getting it in. Obvious. Anybody with a PowerPoint can give me a presentation to make that. What's less obvious is, what is the value of screening distractions out? And that's an application of Tarzan Economics.
Got it. And going beyond the media world, what's the one key lesson other sectors facing disruption can learn from the music situation?
Well, we're not far from Westminster, and I think one sector that could take a lot from this book is Parliament, is governments around the world. And, you know, we have a chapter dedicated to this in the book, but it's simply to hammer home this point of what matters most to our lives often is what's measured least. And I think this is a universal point for individuals, for industries, but also for political institutions, is just to appreciate, Wikipedia as an example. It's the sum of all the world's knowledge. It does no environmental damage, and it adds 0 to gross domestic product. Now you, Simon, can think of lots of things which are not the sum of all the world's knowledge, do terrible environmental damage, and add lots to gross domestic product. What matters most is being measured least. And Running on Highgate Hill last week, I noticed smog on London. Sunny morning, unusual to say that given we're in Scottish weather conditions now. But, sunny morning, I could see smog rising above London. And I thought to myself, would you want to measure the recovery by tracking pollution levels? Guess what, Simon? Pollution's back to where it was in January 2020. We are officially back in business. What matters most is being measured least. Could we measure something different? And there's a lot of lessons in that book. One particular one from Andy Haldane, the former chief economist of the Bank of England, where he was asking, why am I basing interest rate decisions around manufacturing surveys in 2021, recall-based surveys from some factory plant in Solihull? That's literally the tools he's got for affecting decisions that affect the cost of our mortgages and many more variables that affect our lives. He said, I would rather understand anxiety levels in the economy. Brexit's not gone particularly well. We have a pandemic now. I mean, this was in 2018 when I met him. But, what about understanding anxiety of people? Nobody measures that. What matters most is being measured least. And I think that quantification bias of measuring what's easy to capture and thinking that's a be-all and end-all and disregarding what you can't measure as irrelevant, that's got to stop. That's got to stop. The people who can stop that and pivot, swing onto a new vine, are going to succeed. Those who carry on basing interest rate decisions on manufacturing orders is doomed to fail.
Yeah, I think measuring the right things and reporting them in the right way is something that's very much on our minds at the moment, for sure. Massive.
That's new awakening. We have big data. Everybody's getting really, really excited about Tableau dashboards, which, by the way, nobody actually uses, or Google BigQuery and pipeline constructions. I get all that. I've been there, done that, but just swing the pendulum back to a bit of common sense I think is required to understand what this big data might not be telling us.
Brilliant. Will, thank you so much. Always great to chat.
Thank you.
Fascinating insights. Really appreciate your time.
Very grateful to PricewaterhouseCoopers for having me.
Thank you. So many thanks to Will for the great insights there, a conversation I really enjoyed. I will be following up with further discussions with other industry figures to get their thoughts on how disruption can be weathered and the ongoing transformation of the sector.